So Rupert, look, thanks very much for doing this. For those that are on, I suppose for the purpose of recording as well, it's before we do the introduction, maybe it's just worth setting the scene for this. Most of you know who One Equine Trust is. For those of you that don't, it's a very small charitable organisation with one simple vision, that Northern Ireland could excel in this whole field of equine assisted services. But that won't happen without some quite coordinated action. In spite of the sort of heroic efforts of a lot of individual practitioners who set up here, there is little or no support from any sort of governmental or structural side for this work. So it's very patchy. And as you probably know, quite a bit of our work has been with the special educational needs community in schools. So one could say if there's a spectrum in this activity, it's almost the far end of the spectrum of where horseboy work is, with very, very high grade horses and riders and mounted activity. So that's the context, our sort of vision. We are in a very fortunate position where I'm saying Northern Ireland is crudely in the ass of the market, if you like, that we're sitting right next door to a country where we're getting unbelievably generous and professional support from people in the south of Ireland, both from the institutions that have adopted equine assisted services over the years and private practitioners that are making a go of it there. And maybe invite Rupert at some point to say something of what he has seen there and elsewhere, probably in Europe and a little bit in the States, where these services are to some extent covered by health insurance and covered by local authority work and by health service work. So it's by no means a breeze anywhere else, but it's a lot more integrated and supported in some state organisations in all parts of the world. And that's what we aspire to get to. So we aspire to set up the demonstration projects here, which will get people out from behind their desks with their big budgets and say, oh, this work seems to make an impact in the autism community or with other conditions. And for that to be impressive enough to move the needle, we're very clear that standards have to be of a very high grade, and that we can't have a situation developing where it's almost hug a horse type of thing comes along. And I'm not knocking anybody that does that sort of work, but I'm saying for us to be serious about bringing commissioners out from particularly health and education and saying, look, support this work on a long-term basis where people can make real investment, then the standards have to be there, the registration has to be there, the accreditation has to be there. And that's where a lot of the work that Rupert has done in setting up the Horseboy organisation comes into it. So it's not just a training piece. So today is about learning about what Horseboy is about, what the requirements are, and we make no apology for saying, mostly on Rupert's recommendation, I suppose, that the standard of horsemanship that's required to get into this field, particularly if you're going to be riding 2 up with children of neurodiverse issues, standard of horsemanship is not something you're going to learn in half a dozen riding lessons. This is a different sort of a caliber of person that you're bringing into it. So we haven't thrown this out widely at this stage. We've limited it to BHS coaches in Northern Ireland. So I suppose it's over to Rupert, really. Look, there's the partly shaven, long-haired hippie is a serious individual most of the time.
As little as I can get away with, Richard, because we don't stop playing because we get old. We get old because we stop playing.
Yeah.
And one of the things about this field, as we know, is that actually you have to not just really dedicate yourself to the equine skills and the neuroscience and all that, but you have to know how to think like a child. If you lose that lightheartedness, you actually cannot be effective, because all you will do is bring stress. And this is something which I think, as we are looking to the somewhat stressful situations of, moving from the margins to the mainstream, it becomes of even more importance, because ultimately the child or the human, because it's adults too that walk through your door for the service, will either be helped or they will not. And so if we don't have a certain lightness of heart, we're actually unlikely to be able to be very effective. It's like doctors with good bedside manner. If there are very brilliant doctors who come out of medical school and kill all their patients, but maybe do good research or something, and then there's people who just seem to make people feel better. And so much of that is the quality of humanity that we bring. So, we must keep that front and center as well. But yes, okay, let's dive into what is Horseboy. And actually, it's not just Horseboy, it's what is New Trails Learning Systems, because it's more than Horseboy. So we have three programs. Horseboy Method is the first one. It's the oldest one. It's the one that we began with. It's the best, it's the most established. But almost immediately, we realized that the time that you spent off the horse was as important. This was partly because I also had to homeschool at that time, because I was living in rural Texas and the schools were not really able to serve my son. He was too extreme. So I had to homeschool, and I had to figure out a way to get what were the clear benefits of what was going on the horse, not on the horse. So I began to emulate the same types of movement. And what do you know? It worked. And I began to feed the national curriculum into him. And this is now something called movement method, which is also like Horseboy method in about 40 countries. And it's not just for special needs, it's in mainstream schools. It's a more effective way of learning. And we found out the neuroscience behind why, which I'll talk about in a moment. So there's Horseboy method, which is mounted, usually smaller children with a child in front of you. Why is that useful? I'll go into. There's movement method, which is getting similar results without a horse. Also very useful to give parents things to do when they go home, so that it's not just when they come to your center that that they get the benefit, that there's a lasting benefit. You can show people what to do on their 24/7 home culture. And then we have something called tackine equine integration, and that's a word that looks a bit weird. Takhin, takin. And takin is the Mongolian word. Many of you may know that I rode across a big chunk of Mongolia with my son in the early days of my story. Takin is a Mongolian word, and it's their word for the wild horse, what we would call the Przewalski's horse. And it means honored one or revered one. And what's interesting about that is that this is a culture that absolutely relies upon the domesticated horse 100% and completely, and yet they really honor the wild nature of the horse. And I always liked that. So what tackine equine integration is, it's how you train the Horseboy horse, which is classical dressage done from the ground. It's all groundwork, as its own therapy. So we do this with adult autists, we do this with people with trauma, etc. And frequently, as you guys know, your average therapy horse is a donation horse that comes with stories in its body and its brain that maybe were not so good for it. So I can say, go to a veteran or someone who's survived abuse or whatever and say, this horse was broken in service. Would you please help us rehab this horse, put it back together, so it can serve that autistic child over there? And that, of course, is its own empowerment and its own therapy. And this happened, like all the things that I do, purely out of necessity, because we were running out of time to be able to train and condition our own horses. And then I realized, oh my gosh, the clients, the service users, should be the horse trainers. And then, of course, a whole program came from that. So 3 things: Horseboy method, mounted program, mostly aimed at smaller, younger kids. Movement method, no horses at all, but getting similar effects. You do this when the child is not on the horse at your center, and also you show the parents what to do at home. And tackine, how you condition, rehab, and maintain your therapy horses as its own therapy. 3 related programs. Now, what do they do? Why do they work? Why, despite being this, as Richard Moore pointed out, am I just this long-haired hippie that somehow these programs which we develop, why are they in 40 countries? Why do people do them? People only do stuff that works. If you put something out there and it doesn't work, well, people aren't going to do it. Why is it so effective? Okay, so it was born from necessity. This is the first thing you guys must understand. I did not want to do this work at all. It was not my desire. I did not want to go into the equine assisted field, period. I had to. Why did I have to? Because my oldest son, who's now 24 and doing very well, was diagnosed with very severe autism back in 2004, non-verbal, incontinent, self-harming tantrums, inability to make friends, etc. So what are you going to do if you're in my position? You're going to reach out to therapists. And so I did. And back then, the prevailing therapies, this was in the USA, I was living there at the time, were something called ABA, which is a form of behavioral therapy, and some speech and language stuff, and some OT. Well, the OT wasn't bad, but the other stuff really just didn't work at all. And the ABA certainly not only didn't work, but actually made things worse. He would literally try to escape the room. And I'm a journalist by trade, so as well as a horse trainer. So one of the things which you know as a journalist is, if something doesn't seem to be working, you ask why. And if, as a horse trainer, if a horse is literally trying to climb out of the brown pen or arena when you're working with it, well, you're going to change something about what you're doing now, or you're going to get killed. But when I asked the behavioral therapists, well, what should we change here to not cause distress? Because he's clearly hating it. They just became very aggressive with me, these therapists. And of course, as a journalist, you know shit when you smell it. It's like, why do you need to become so aggressive with me? The only reason people become aggressive is when they're afraid of something. Okay, what are you afraid of? You must be afraid that I am sort of seeing that your thing doesn't work, and this is making you defensive. Okay, well, that's not going to get us anywhere. So, but I had no alternative to them. What else am I going to do? So I thought, well, okay, if I've got no answers, I must have the opposite of answers, right? So what's the opposite of an answer? It's a question. So, okay, what are my questions? This is journalist mind, if you like. So I thought, okay, well, my questions are, where can I find somebody to show me what to do? I need a mentor. Who is this mentor? And I'm a strong believer in mentorship. I don't believe that one can answer all questions oneself when things are outside of one's ken, and this was definitely outside of my ken. You got to find, a mentor. So I thought, well, okay, what qualities must this mentor have? So, okay, they have to be autistic. That's the first thing. Because if they're not autistic, then they will have opinions, but that's all they'll have. They won't have lived experience from within the condition. Okay, and they're going to need, thank you. I'm going to eat while I speak, if that's okay, because I was on a long call before this, and otherwise I won't eat. So my apologies for eating in front of you. This autistic person needs to be an adult who started life as severe as my son, non-verbal, incontinent, self-harming tantrums. And this person needs to have somehow made it. Who's that person? I found that person. It actually wasn't that difficult to identify that person. That person is still a lady called Dr. Temple Grandin. Dr. Temple Grandin is a professor of animal sciences at Colorado State University. She's also a multiple best-selling author of books about the brain, animal communication, autism, animal behavior, and so on. And she revolutionized the slaughter industry. This is actually how Richard knows of her, by making abattoirs that were less stressful for the animals to go through. And for that, she receives death threats from the animal rights community, showing that no good deed goes unpunished. She started at 3 years old. She was rocking in a corner, non-verbal, wiping her poo on the walls. This is back in the 50s. Her father was going to institutionalize her. Her mother said, no, I know there's an intellect in there. I just don't know how to reach it. And so she figured out that by following her daughter's obsessive interests, which were animals and later things in science, she could eventually find her way in, and she was right. And so I wrote to Temple Grandin and said, can I please have an interview? And I flew up to Colorado State University, Fort Collins, sat in her office. And when I went into her office, she was doing this. Very autistic behaviors. And I felt the weight of the world lift from my shoulders, because I thought, oh, wow, amazing. You can be like that and still be a multiple best-selling author, have tenure at a university, have a couple of PhDs, be more economically successful than I am. Okay, clearly autism is not the problem here. Something else must be the problem here. Because you can be like this and be totally successful. So I asked her the obvious question, which is, how does my son become you? And she told me how. And basically, you could say that what I'm doing is what Temple's mother did with her. But I just happen to now to know the neuroscience behind it, so we can replicate it. So this is where the lineage of horseboy method, movement method, and techine come from. They come from the mentorship of Dr. Temple Grandin and the efforts that her own mother made in the 50s and 60s. It doesn't come out of nowhere, you see.
Just to let Rupert get a bite of his sandwich there for a second, because
it's got to cool off. Actually, it's a toasty.
All right, sorry,
and it's just come out.
But to go back to the point about support in this whole field. So I suppose when we started this journey, you thought you were on your own, but I had met Temple Grandin through the meat industry, which was my career. I'd met the person just through correspondence, assuming they were male, because they're in the slaughter industry and they're in the engineering industry, and not knowing about the autism piece. If you get a chance to watch the movie of her life, it's really, really revealing for anybody that's touched into that. But it helps people like me who knew nothing about autism to understand. But what really struck me about her, the generosity of spirit. She's been in Belfast 2 or 3 times. I've had dinner with her. She's an open door. She recorded a piece
she'll help you.
Camera for us. So that the resource to have access to that sort of resource and intelligence without a fee, without any barriers, it's just amazing. And the thing that really struck me when I first actually met her in person was she said, and this was particularly around the animal science, animal behavior. So she's got 2 careers. She's an animal behaviorist, animal scientist in a real hard-nosed feedlot and slaughtering industry. So, but nobody in any brains would design an animal handling facility in the world now without her say so. And then she's I use the word celebrity, I suppose, in lieu of anything else. She's a celebrity in the autism field and advocating for what people on the spectrum can do and what they can achieve. And the one thing that struck me at the time was relevant to what I was trying to do, was she said some of the best stock people in the world, people handling and responsible for the movement of animals in alien circumstances, so in feedlots and in systems designed by men, the best stock people she had ever seen were on the spectrum to some extent. So that sparked an interest in why does somebody with this so-called disability have an ability to work with animals and understand animals, and that's what triggered my interest up. But the illustration of what Rupert's bringing to mind for me is you only have to lift the phone. Anybody, a practitioner, anybody outside interest, there are no barriers, no hierarchy here. There's no, I must go through 20 secretaries to get to people who have these life experiences want to help, and then ditto across the road, Dublin, Cork, Limerick. You know what? So you can get access to the very best information and the very best advice and the best lived experiences without any cost. So there is no reason why we couldn't construct something. There are no barriers to knowledge that stop us constructing something powerful in Northern Ireland. That's my view. So sorry to interrupt, but if you haven't watched the movie of our life, I think it's something everybody who's an interest in this field should do. And the wonderful thing she said in the interview was she was very, very appreciative of the woman who acted her, I think in her mid-teens up into her 20s, was an English actress. And she said for anybody that's neurotypical to be able to act neurodiversity was quite astounding.
Yeah, it's on HBO, the biopic with Dr. Temple Grandin about her, and ironically, they filmed a lot of it in the town in Texas where we lived. What are the odds? I remember driving through the town to do some shopping and saying road closed for filming, and there was this cow thing, and I just had this thing, are they making a film about Temple Grandin and her cows and it turned out they were, and it was right there. So, something was at work. Okay. But Richard's point is very valid, which is that the people who are the leaders in the field of what we do, particularly in Ireland, there's a man called David Doyle. There's a lady called Terry Brosnan. There's another lady called Lucy Dillon, who are extremely established and effective at this. They will help you. You have only, and in the UK, we have practitioners like Alex Northover and Nicole Gillard and Troy Shaw and people like this who are real mentors in this field. Never feel that you have to exist in isolation. Simply reach out. You reach out to me, I will put you in touch with these people. I will also help you myself, because for everyone like my son who gets helped, I have a mission. I take it seriously. Most of us do. All right. So I'm not here to sort of sell you my programs. I'm here to tell you what can be done. Okay. And I don't really care whether you do my programs or not. I just happen to know that we are pretty effective. But I would also hope that you go and do other programs too, because that's just rational, to expand your portfolio. Yes, of course. All of our programs are also kind of living organisms. We're constantly working with neuroscientists and other people within the field and other autists to make what we do better. If you are not being mentored, you probably aren't going to be that effective. If you want to go and get a degree, you kind of need a professor, and so you always want to look for the people who have the direct life experience, which means that you also want to be mentored by people with the condition that you are trying to serve. If you are going to, rehab for drugs and alcohol, you would hope that the person who is assigned as your mentor there is a recovered addict, because how can they possibly help you if they haven't gone through it? And it's very much the same here. You need people with the condition. You need people who are parents. You need people who have all the direct, experience. It's not something that's just theoretical. That said, I'm going to talk you through the science of why this stuff works. Okay. But let me just go back to that room with Dr. Grandin. I'm sitting there with her and I say, how does my son become you? And she says, Rupert, do 3 things. And you might want to write these 3 things down, because they're coming straight from her. They're not coming from me. Okay. The first thing she says is follow the child. That's an easy thing to say. It's actually a rather complex thing to do, because nowhere in our culture do we follow children. It's the other way around. So you have to actually change your paradigm about how you relate to kids completely. Okay, follow the child. That's the first thing. Then she says, as much as possible, work with them outside, not inside. And there are neurosensory reasons for this, which we'll go into in a minute. And then she said, the third and most important thing, let them move. Physically move all the time, as much as they need to, while you're working with them. Your job is to run after them, not to make them sit still. Because most of these people are primarily kinetic or kinesthetic learners. They are going to learn in movement, and by doing. They are not really going to learn at this stage of their lives, sitting like we are now, getting direct sort of verbal transmission from the top-down instruction. That's not how their brains work at all. Now, it doesn't mean that their brains might not get there. There is this thing called neuroplasticity. And that is why our programs are effective. That's what our programs do. Our programs effectively grow a new brain. But you must start where the child is. You must start where the person is, not where you want them to be. Because it's bigger than you. It's like the ocean, like a horse. You can want it to be something different, but it won't be. Okay. All right. So what does follow the child mean? I asked this question myself because I said, that sounds rather general. What can you be a bit more, specific? And she said, well, actually, yes, I can, Ru. It means three things. So again, you might want to write these three things down. You have to follow the child physically. That's about observation. Because let's say you have someone with this thing called autism. What does that word mean? So many people work in that field and they don't even know what the semantics of that word mean. But if we're professionals in this field, we might want to. So what does autism mean? Why do they call it AUT-ism? Auto is the Greek word for the self. Automobile, the thing that moves by, the horseless carriage moves by itself. Automatic, propelled by itself. Autoism, locked within the self. The difficulty is the relationship with the exterior world. Neurotypical humans are compulsive communicators. That's our superpower, really, is communication. They call us Homo sapiens sapiens. It's not a very good description for us because that just means the thinking ape. But anything with a brain thinks, and lots of things on the planet have brains. So there's nothing specific to our species about thinking. Where we differ is the larynx. This Adam's apple thing that I've got is a larynx enlarged through testosterone. The voice box, the speaking ape, the storytelling ape, that's our species. We are social predators who strategize. And when we strategize, we go from the middle of the food chain to the top of the food chain. So when we encounter someone who has I don't want to communicate-ism, autoism, it's difficult for us because it's like outside of our ken. So somebody who's nonverbal is not going to tell you what they're interested in. They are just going to go and engage with things. And you have to be there and observe and try and see patterns. So the first part of follow the child is you literally have to follow them around with keen observation rather than trying to direct them all the time. This is hard because none of us were brought up that way. It's a skill you have to learn. People who play a lot of football are actually quite good at it because they often have to mark their opposite number in a team. It's very like that. You have to kind of be there, observe, but don't get in the way. But make a play from time to time. Okay, then you have to follow the child emotionally. What does that mean? That's also about the doing it outside part. It's about sensory stuff. So you could put in brackets. If you put follow the child physically, you'd have brackets saying observation. Follow the child emotionally, you'd have a bracket saying sensory. Temple said to me, Rupert, these tantrums that your son is having all the time, you think they're coming out of the blue, but they're not. They are usually triggered by some sort of negative sensory impulse or other, because people on the autism spectrum have overdeveloped nervous systems. We don't know why. They're oversensitive. And what they're doing is they're constantly triggering the fight, flight, freeze part of your brain, which is called the amygdala. And you can spell amygdala like a female rap singer, Amy G. Dala, D-A-L-A. The amygdala is the part of your brain that tells your body when there's a threat, and it doesn't care, by the way, whether the threat is real or imagined. That's why you don't want to catastrophize in your brain about things, because what will happen is your amygdala will then tell your body to produce two hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. C-O-R-T-I-S-O-L, cortisol. Cortisol is a neurotoxin. Its job is to kill brain cells. That seems counterintuitive. Why would, at the moment of danger, your brain tell your body to produce a toxin that kills brain cells, right when you kind of need to think your way out of a situation? No? Well, nature always has a reason. So what it wants you to do is act, not think. And you're supposed to do that for a split second and then go back to thinking again. It's like a pair of scissors that just momentarily cuts that cord between the non-conscious and the conscious part of your brain. Unfortunately, if negative sensory triggers are constantly triggering this oversensitive nervous system, then you're just getting an overload of cortisol poisoning all the time and brain cells being killed. And it's like the intellect, it's intact, but it's behind a locked door. You can't reach it. So you have to, she said, you have to see what the patterns are, because you're following the kid, that are in the environment when the meltdowns are happening. And after a while, you'll start to see that it could be things like fluorescent strip lights, echo in a room. These are known bad sensory triggers, by the way. Machine noise, a yappy dog, perceived threat from a human, somebody being grumpy, somebody being impatient. Horse people, terrible about that. Rough tone of voice, body language like this. Big freak out for somebody on the spectrum. In our trainings, obviously, we go into what the main bad sensory triggers, known bad sensory triggers are, but suffice to say that they're often in people's homes, and they're often certainly in schools, supermarkets, quite often in riding centres, big fluorescent strip lights, in the middle of the aisleways and in the covered arena. A lot of rules about what you can't do. No, don't, stop, stop. A lot of people walking around with busy body language and quite aggressive, and the radio going and the tractor going and a yappy dog, and yeah, shuts them down. So you need to follow the child emotionally by seeing where they're having the meltdowns, where they're having negative reactions, asking yourself quite honestly, what's in the environment that I can eliminate? Now, the good thing is that nature, this is why doing things outside is good, nature has very few bad sensory triggers. Almost all the bad sensory triggers are man-made, almost all, because we are organisms. We're like frogs, we're like earthworms, we're like trees. We are designed for a particular environment, and that environment is called planet Earth. And we're very adaptable, so we can live in we're one of the most adaptable species out there. We can live in many different environments, but what we do need is nature. And we all feel better in nature. And you might think, oh, no, I don't. I don't like nature. Nature's, about getting cold or bitten by mosquitoes and stuff. But everybody goes on holiday to the beach. Why? Because that's the environment where Homo sapiens sapiens, our species, evolved, at the margin of land and water in a warm environment where that's where the most food is. And that's why we seek it out, even now, today, as modern humans living suburban lives, wherever we want to go to the beach. So that's kind of how you have to think. You have to think, what's the optimal human environment and how do I create it? Okay. And luckily, we horse people can do this. And now the third one is so interesting. You have to follow the child intellectually. Now, what does that mean? Because I said, look, Temple, I've got a non-verbal 3-year-old here. I'm not having conversations. What do you mean? She said, Rupert, it's in the obsessions. It's in the obsessive interests that they get into. You have to follow those. You have to get into them right along with them. even if it's something that bores you to tears, like Minecraft or Marvel superheroes or something. I'm not interested in those things, but a lot of the kids that I work with are, so I get interested in them. And I also make sure that I know as much as possible that's in the environment, so that I can talk about what that tree is and what that animal is and what that cloud system is and why is the wind coming from this direction right now, and all of this stuff that's going on. And when I'm doing trainings in our programs, I'll often say to people, can you tell me what that tree is? Can you tell me what the history of this piece of ground is? What was going on here in the 15th century? What was going on in here in the 11th century? What was going on here in Celtic times? What was going? And people say, "Oh, Rupert, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in I'm not interested in trees. I'm not interested in history." Well, get interested, because you've got to be giving a story to these kids to help them to interact with the world that is around them. Because you will have to just kind of give a commentary, and then you will have to see what they pick up on. And whatever they pick up on, you go with. And if it's something you don't know about, you get on Wikipedia, and you know, you've got a phone in your pocket. You can very quickly do a little bit of research on the fly. But you have to think like this. It's not enough to just be an equine practitioner. Why? Because we're dealing with the nervous system and the brain. If you want to deal with nervous systems and brains, you have to engage them. Also, if you want a child, or a horse for that matter, to make some sort of big change, let's say you want a child to talk, you want a child to learn toileting skills, you want a child to learn social skills, you want a horse to go into a trailer, you want a horse to accept a saddle on its back. These are huge, huge deals for that child and that horse. So if you're going to be the person that asks this, what changes are you making? What challenges are you currently involved in? What languages are you currently learning? What new skills are you currently learning that stretch you? What musical instruments are you learning? If the answer is none of the above, then what tools do you have for leadership to show somebody else who's more vulnerable than you, with 2 legs or 4, how to make this kind of change? If you say, well, no, I don't need to make that change because I'm God, I'm the therapist, there's nothing wrong with me. Well, A, we know that's not true. There's something wrong with all of us. But B, we're in the job, we're professionals involved in neurological transformation, which means we ourselves have to be involved in that. Okay. So what Temple told me in that office, I went home and did. And that's how I got to the horse. Because although I'm a lifelong horseman, it actually had not occurred to me to put my son with horses. And I'll tell you why. At the time, I was jumping on the semi-pro circuit in Central Texas. And so all the horses I was dealing with were, you know, reactive sport horses that, frankly, yeah, he would have been unsafe around. So I was actively trying to keep him away from horses. This is the irony. By following what she told me to do, which was following him first into the woods behind my house, he found his way to my neighbor's quarter-horse mare, Betsy, and made his own relationship with her. I was following. I could see that she modified her behavior towards him, that he wanted to get up on her back. And I knew the mare. I knew she was quiet, so I let him get up there, and I kept a hand on him like that while he lay on her body while she grazed. And all of his agitated behaviors just went away while he was in this position. I had no idea why this was going on, but, well, great. So then it was, of course, very natural for me to think, well, what would happen if I rode with him? But you must remember that I got there by asking for mentorship from somebody with autism who had started where my son had started. And when I was at first just following him through the woods, what he wanted to do was put stuff in his mouth. And I had a choice. I could say yes or I could say no. But I knew very early that I needed a yes environment. This is one of the key things of doing our kind of work. You need a yes environment. Why do you need the environment of yes, because most horse people create the environment of no. Lots of rules, safety, etc., etc. Sure, absolutely, we've got to abide by the rules of safety. But it means that we have to be really good at what we do, because we have to be able to create a safe environment, a yes environment where there may be dangers. We have to be able to modify that environment. If you have someone who doesn't really want to communicate, let's say you want me to learn Irish. That's a difficult language, right? I speak German, I speak French. Irish would be a tall order. Let's say you want me to learn that language. If you say no to me every 5 seconds, stop, don't do that. What? I'm probably not going to learn the language. I'm probably just going to switch off and go do something else. If you want somebody to do something difficult, and for someone with autism, communication is difficult. So it's an effort. You have to make it really possible for them. So the environment of yes is important. Okay, so my son's putting stuff in his mouth. Luckily for me, I had lived with hunting and gathering tribes in the Kalahari area of, thank you, someone's just handed me a cup of tea, that's very nice. One of my excellent horseboy practitioners actually just come back from working in Ireland. And if you are with hunting and gathering people for any length of time, you learn very quickly that the vast majority of what you see on planet Earth is edible. Might not taste great, but most of it's edible. I was in Central Texas, which actually has a lot of poisonous plants. But I could very quickly learn what were the 10 most obvious edible plants, what were the obvious non-edible toxic plants, and I couldn't explain toxicity or edibility to my non-verbal autistic 3-year-old at that point. But what I did was I said, let's go look for daddy leaves. These ones over here, these are daddy leaves. Those ones over there, no, they're not daddy leaves. And that was enough. And to this day, my son can feed himself from the forest. It's actually a skill everybody should have. Take something from that little anecdote. Learn your environment. Now, it's very easy in the UK and Ireland to do that because the biodiversity is not that great. So you're probably always looking at the same 10 to 20 trees. You're looking at the same 30 to 40 shrubs. You're looking at the same 30 to 40 wildflowers. And it's not that difficult to learn what they are, what their nutritional uses are, and what their medicinal uses are. Learn them, please, because you can talk to the kids about it and they are interested. Why are they interested? Because they're organisms on planet Earth and their natural desire for learning has not yet been killed. They haven't had it conditioned out of them yet. And also, you're going to learn a lot more about horsekeeping and animal husbandry, frankly, if you learn all that stuff too, because you'll learn things about herbs and pasture management and all sorts of things, browsing that you might not know if you don't learn that kind of stuff. So just as a horse person, it's worth learning. All right, fine. So I realize it might be a good idea to perhaps see what happens if I ride with my kid. So this is Texas, right? So most of the kids in Texas start riding. Most of the kids west of the Mississippi in the US start riding. In fact, most of the kids in the Americas, except the East Coast of America, start riding. In fact, most of the people in Northern Asia, which are horse cultures, learn to ride not on a lunge line with a riding instructor because they come from horse cultures, not from horse sport. They learn to ride in front of mum and dad on a horse because horses are still transport, horses are still used to work cows, horses are still very much part of the working life. And so big Western saddle, room for two, up I get, and I'm riding down the driveway and a big heron gets up and flaps away from the pond. And my son says, heron. And this was the same week that the speech and language therapist had given up on him and said, I don't really think this guy is going to be verbal. And I didn't know he even knew what a heron was. But he'd been watching wildlife documentaries with me and that sort of thing. You know, he must have picked it up somewhere. He said heron. And I realized, oh my gosh, we've got something here. So I just kept doing it. And I noticed very, very quickly, this is really important. Might want to write this down. The rhythm that the horse was in was make or break when it came to communication. And what I mean by this is the more collected the rhythm, the more communication. I started going to little jog trot, gentle, collected jog trot, little Western jog. He starts to talk more. Okay. What happens if I canter? Oh my God, Rupert, you're going to canter with an autistic kid up there? I was, yes, I'm a good horseman. I'm a professional horseman with a big Western saddle on a well-trained horse that knows how to ease into a Western lope from sitting on the hindquarters gently at about the speed that you'd walk, not a hunting canter going forward into a big hedge. No, I know how to do both of those things. Obviously, that's not what I was going to do. Easy, collected, just because it's safe. But we know it feels good. All of us, all of we horse people know that riding in collection feels physically good, don't we? Yeah. Everyone likes it. Right. Why? So I'm getting loads of communication in this very collected canter. What's going on here? Why? I'm a journalist. Why? Okay, so I live in the saddle with my kid for literally about 3 years. And I end up riding across Mongolia with him and making that film, The Horse Boy, and writing that book and all that stuff. He becomes verbal in about 18 months, but he doesn't just become verbal, he becomes literate and numerate. And then I take these collected hip rocking rhythms and I start doing them not on the horse. Play equipment, swings, my shoulders, yoga balls, trampolines, because I had to homeschool. Where I was in Texas, you really kind of do. In my position, you had to. And it doesn't just work amazingly for him. I start running unofficial play dates. So this whole thing happens organically, right? It's not Rupert Isaacson decides, I'm going to do this horseboy method thing. No. Starts a necessity, reaching out for mentorship, then doing what works. And then, of course, I want a bit of a social life for my kids. So I start reaching out to other families in the area who've got kids, with similar conditions. There's lots of them. They're all isolated. So yeah, they all want to come to the farm. And I also am curious. I want to see, does it work for them too? Yes, it does. My God, every single kid that we get up there doing that stuff with, we see a change. We see a big change, a big positive change. All right, what's going on? So at that point, I need my second set of mentors. I need to find out, why is this working? So I think, okay, well, something's happening in the brain, clearly. Something's happening in the nervous system, clearly. Who are the people who know about brains and nervous systems? Neuroscientists. So I reach out to different neuroscientists, and also including Temple Grandin, because she's also, among many other things, a neuroscientist, but also a guy called Dr. Robert Navio, who was running the Mitochondrial Institute at the University of California, San Diego, and some others as well. Dr. Alison Moitri from the same lab, and I got the same answer from all of them. They said, that hip rocking that happens in those collective rhythms creates a hormone. That's why it feels good. That hormone has a name. It's called oxytocin. Write it down. Oxytocin. Oxytocin isn't just a nervous system calming hormone. It's not just a feel-good hormone. It's the hormone of communication. It's tied up with our reproductive system. We get it when we make love, we get it when we dance, we get it when we get a massage, we get it when we pet our dog. Any kind of social contract type good thing. But if we add hip rocking to it, we magnify it, makes us want to communicate. Because when we have a baby in the wild, we breed an embryo and we fire that embryo onto the floor of Africa, surrounded by predators, and we ourselves are the mid-level predator, not the top predator. So if there isn't a communicative bond between the two people that create that helpless kid, the kid won't survive. We need to strategize, strategize, strategize. Oxytocin is about strategy. Nature always has a reason. The oxytocin calms that overstressed nervous system. And when it gets to the brain, it tells the amygdala, enough already, there is no lion attacking you. You don't need to be producing this cortisol. The cortisol stops being produced, which means you suddenly have access to the prefrontal cortex, the intellect, reason, logic, planning, and the big one, emotional regulation. Putting in layman's terms, figuring shit out and handling your shit. If you can do those two things, you have a sporting chance of surviving and thriving on planet Earth. If you cannot do those two things, probably lion food. So suddenly, the prefrontal cortex, the intellect, is engaged. We suddenly have access. And the learning comes, not just the communication. And there's more. When you move and problem solve at the same time, so think any sport, any type of dance, any type of walking through nature where you have to constantly think, where do I put my feet? How do I balance? How do I not fall over? Which, of course, when you're on a horse, you're balancing, aren't you? All the time. And you've got to modify your movement to the horse's movement, even if you're up there with somebody else. Your brain produces, when you do this, a protein. And this one you want to write down for sure. This protein has a 4-letter acronym. Just 4 letters in neuroscience terms. The letters are B, D, N, F. The B stands for brain. The D stands for derived, like made in, produced by. Made in brain. The N is a long word. Neuro, N-E-U-R-O, means brain cells. Trophic, like a trophy that you might win with a PH. That's a Greek word to grow, to get bigger. Champion style. Neurotrophic, growing of brain cells. F, factor, effect. The brain producing more of itself. Earlier in this webinar, I talked about neuroplasticity. That is what neuroplasticity actually is. It's BDNF. BDNF is one of 5 neurotrophins, which are proteins that cause you to produce more neurons and brain and cells for your nervous system. You've got 4 of them are below your neck and 1 is above your neck. BDNF is the one that's above your neck. It's specific to the brain. Movement cannot be separated from learning. If you make kids sit still in class, the stress of doing that will shut some of them down from learning. Many of them, most of them. I told you before that I speak 2 other languages. I learned them on the back of a horse. I didn't learn them in classrooms. Oxytocin and BDNF. If you have a passionate interest, I can find what that is and I'll teach you through that passionate interest. That's movement method. If I can put you on a horse while doing it, that becomes horseboy method. And then I might show you how to train that horse. That's a lot of BDNF on the ground. You are going to grow a new brain. I am going to grow a new brain while helping you grow a new brain. And you have to do this all the time. You can't just do this like once in your life. Think of your brain, excuse me, like your cell phone, which just disappeared because we have a medieval, we're in this old medieval house in Spain right now with a lot of construction going on behind it. So that's why my wife has thoughtfully given me this London Victorian interior wherever I seem to be. That's why parts of me come and go. All right. Your brain is like this. So imagine if this, when you woke up in the morning, had no apps, no battery, no nothing. But as you moved through the day, it just began to power up and download apps from the cloud. Then perhaps you go dancing at night, and it really becomes like a supercomputer, and you start, crunching quantum stuff and leaping dimensions. And then you go to bed at night, you put the thing back on the nightstand, and it goes back to where it was. That's your brain. So you have to keep moving. There is a parallel here with dementia. You put old people in old people parking, brain dies very fast. We know this. There is also a parallel with young people. If they get too much screen time and not enough movement, it's called digital dementia. And it's the same thing, the brain not developing properly. So movement is really, really key. Remember back to what Temple told me right at the beginning, let them move. So out of this, once we knew this process that was going on with the oxytocin and the BDNF, and there's more I could talk about with the vestibular system, with certain cells in your cerebellum called Purkinje cells, which govern social skills, which come out of the BDNF. When we do our trainings, we go into the neuroscience in some detail. But just suffice to say for now that what we're doing is neuroscience based, but we didn't know it when we were first doing it. We were just observing that it worked. And all good science comes this way. All good science comes first from observation of a phenomenon. The apple falls. Why does it fall? Right? So the kid speaks. Why is the kid speaking? Why is all these kids speaking? Okay, now we know. So once we knew that collection in the horse and rocking the hips in these motions on play equipment and so on produce oxytocin, which calms the nervous system, which opened up communication, which opened up the prefrontal cortex. And this moving and problem solving created the BDNF, which created neuroplasticity, so that we could see that the kid's brain, 6 weeks into when we were working, was completely different to when we started. We realized we could replicate. And that's when we began to train people in what we did. And we started that back in 2010. We have never marketed anything we've done. So we put on Facebook once. We might be thinking about doing a training in this thing. We're going to call it Horseboy Method for want of a better title, because we recently published this book called The Horseboy. Anyone interested? And since then, we kind of haven't stopped. And we work with multiple universities now. So a PhD has been done into movement method in schools in Germany. What was really interesting about that was we expected to see better academic scores and better student behaviors. And these were in failing schools with a lot of violence. And we definitely saw that. But what we didn't expect to see was the higher teacher satisfaction and retention, teachers staying in the job because they weren't failing. Similarly, if you are working in the equine assisted industry, you do want to see tangible change. Well, with this, you're going to get it. But you have to get pretty serious about the horsemanship. So I've talked about collection. Collection isn't just something you get, right? So I got up there on Betsy, that was the mare, and collected her and went into this collector canter. Well, I spent, some decades learning how to do that, right? These are skills. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, now I know why I spent all this time learning how to be the best rider I could possibly be, so that suddenly I could tap into that skill set to serve my son and then eventually others like him. So if you're going to do Horseboy Method, you definitely need to be coming from, if you're going to be the one delivering the mounted service, you need to have a certain number of years under your belt in the saddle. You've got to have a very, very good collected very good independent seat. And then we show you how to train your horse to do this. Now, we're not asking you, in horseboy method in the early stages of it to work at the canter. No. You can do everything at the walk and at a gentle trot. But if you keep working with it, you will get to the point where it's very natural for you and the horse to canter at 0.2 miles an hour. It's what's called the terre à terre in old dressage, and effectively almost the piaffe in canter. And you're going to get all of this stuff. But we don't ask you to start there. No, that would be unreasonable and stupid. But we definitely do need you to take really seriously not just the production of your horse and you as a horseman or woman, person, but also equine well-being. If you want to deliver well-being to a human through a horse, that's not possible unless the horse has well-being to give. What is equine well-being? So there are things, what do horses need? Horses need friends, they're herd animals. They need forage. They need to constantly be ingesting low protein food through their gut because they don't have four stomachs. They have one stomach, and they need, to be constantly passing stuff through it. And they need freedom. They need to move. They're actually very, very similar to autistic kids, to kids in general, to people that way. So if horses are stabled all the time, it's a problem. If horses are not in any kind of herd structure, it's a problem. And if horses don't have a lot of forage, it's a problem. And they will not have well-being. They'll have stomach ulcers, they'll be resentful, and they'll be lonely. And they might also be stiff because they're not moving enough and stretching enough through the back. So that's at the very least, you have to have that. Now, what do you do if you haven't got that? So say, for example, we work very closely with a place called Child Vision in the middle of Dublin. They don't have a lot of turnout, but they've figured out how to get the maximum they can in herd structures for these horses on this very limited piece of ground that they've got in the middle of Dublin. They maximize that. They take it really seriously, and they turn the horses out together in the arena all the time and do what we call crazy time, which is playing games with the horses in small herds. And then, of course, they rotate the horses out to the country, every 10 days to 2 weeks, and in rotating herds. So they really address this issue, and they get a good result. The horses have well-being to give. But if they were all stood in stables 23 hours a day, they would not. Doesn't mean you can't stable your horse. It means that they need enough movement if you are stabling them to offset the time that they're in the stable. And they need enough time in herds for the time that they're not in herds. It's all about balance. Okay. Then to create a horse that can carry a human comfortably, whether it's me with the child or just me myself, they need a strong back. So with all of our stuff, it's all about building the top line. We spend more time than the sport people do building top line. So we lunge our horses a lot, and we long rein our horses a lot. It's built into what we do. You think, well, how am I going to have the time to do that? I've got, all these clients. Don't worry. It's part of how you serve your clients. The conditioning of your horse is the client session. So you are long reining your kids on the horse. You are working your horse in hand with a kid on top. You are lunging, teaching kids how to lunge. You are, that's the taquine program. So you integrate that into what you do. Then there's no time conflict. There's no stress with, oh God, how am I going to do all these things that Rupert's telling me to do? Don't worry. It's all integrated. We've gone through that learning curve because we went through all those stresses. That's why we have these 3 programs. They're all running simultaneously all the time. So let's say, Richard is my client. He's traumatized because he spent too many hours in the pub with me, getting bored by my endless repetition of the same jokes. So in order to address that trauma, I have him work horses in hand, long reins, and lunging. He gets empowered by that. He gets a lot of BDNF through that. He rehabs horses, and he sees the horse transform under his hands. That's its own therapy. And he also knows he's making a real contribution to that autistic kid over there who's going to sit on that horse. And in the meantime, when he's not on that horse, when the kid's not on that horse, we're doing movement method with them. So that, because what you'll find is when the people are at your barn, at your stable, a goodly chunk of the time, they're not on a horse. What are you doing with that time? And again, what are you giving the parents to take home and the person themselves to take home? If it's all dependent on a horse and it's all dependent on you, it's not much use, actually. People need, for the brain and the nervous system, a kind of 24/7 culture of this type of movement at home. So you teach them the neuroscience that I've talked to you through, and of course we will train you how to do that, and you show them what to do at home as well. So you are a full service to the horse and to the human. What you'll find is that you end up with really cool horses. I now have this whole other weird life as a dressage trainer. What happened was I realized that I had to really, really learn about collection. And I didn't really know that much about collection at the beginning. I knew a bit, but I realized I needed to learn more. So I ended up really learning in handwork. And I went down to Portugal to learn it with a guy who's a sort of master at it called Luis Valença. And within about 2 years of doing that, my backyard therapy quarter horses and donation throwaway rubbish horses that I was working with in Texas, I produced them to FEI level. Piaffe, passage, flying changes, pirouettes, some of them airs above the ground. Within about 24 months. These were my therapy horses. It was just a very logical progression of doing these exercises. And I ended up with horses with fabulous well-being. And people were giving me these horses that were broken. Really, I mean, broken. And I could rehab them and reverse age them. Should probably do it to myself, right? And so this point, Richard, you're supposed to go, no, Rupert, you don't look a day over 15 or whatever, but
Sorry,
clearly,
no.
clearly you're an
This is an authentic webinar.
Yeah, it's all about fishing for compliments, all right? Anyway, so these rabbit holes that I ended up having to go down in order to produce the horses that I needed or learn what to do to help my son, because the initial therapies I was trying were not working, and led me to all these other strange places. So now I go around the world teaching people how to train their horses in piaffe, passage and tempi changes and things. But if you come and spend your time on our ranch or a lot of our really good horseboy places, you'll see the horses doing all that stuff. And they are the 20-year-old therapy donation horses that everyone else gets. You think, oh, I'll never be able to do that. Oh, that's not. No, absolutely anyone can do it. Believe me, if I can do it, anyone can do it. It's a technology that once you understand it, it's a system of exercises like yoga or martial arts. And if you actually just keep following it properly, we train you how to do it, it'll happen. But we don't expect you to be at that level at first, or ever if you don't want to. We just want you to take seriously how to create the basic well-being in a horse. And probably from there it will develop. And we want you to take seriously the neuroscience, and we want you to take seriously the creation of a yes environment. And we want you to take seriously rethinking how you relate to kids and humans, less directive, more following, which means that sometimes people will look at what you're doing and say, oh, it's unstructured. And you say, it's just that the structures are so good they're invisible. Because if structures are visible, they are boring and soul destroying and restrictive. For example, I'm looking at Richard, who's obviously a vision of perfect, male perfection. And so first I just respond to Richard as an aesthetic. He's a male human called Richard. But he has a structure, right? He has this skeleton. And he has this vascular system and this lymphatic system and all of these other things, this nervous system. But I'm not really aware of that. But if he didn't have that structure, he'd just be like blobby, weird Richard in this sort of jelly-like blob on the floor. So structures need to be kind of invisible to be really effective. You need to know what you're doing. You need to know how to create this oxytocin and this BDNF, but make it feel to the client or the service user or the child that you are just following their interests. You know how to make that horse move in a way that gives this effect. You know how to adapt the environment and adapt what's going on in the environment to create the BDNF. But you don't have to bore the person with that unless they're interested, and then you of course teach them the neuroscience. But we're here to talk about superheroes, we're here to talk about superheroes. But I'm going to make sure you get the oxytocin and the BDNF, and I'm also going to teach you math in French at the same time. So we have a website called newtrailslearning.com with all these 3 programs on it, newtrailslearning.com. And yes, it's a membership website. You can do the basic levels of horseboy and movement method on there for like $25. Or you can engage me or one of my team to come and train you much more expensively over 2 days for about $750. So we don't let money stand in the way. On that membership site, if you do join it, there are about 150 lesson plans for how to do this stuff, how to structure this stuff out, to teach everything from the most basic communication to pre-college level math, how to calculate the area of a circle, how to calculate pi using a piece of string and a pony. And of course, that's not me doing those. That's me, again, reaching out for mentorship. I work with a physicist in Germany called Dr. Alfred Ziegler, who comes up with these amazing mathematical things, which we then can adapt into languages and things like that. So we don't leave you unsupported. We show you how to do the whole thing. And it's a lot of fun, because what happens is if you're a really obsessive horse person like me, you inevitably want to learn this type of horsemanship. You want to learn the classical horsemanship, because it's a bit like if you play guitar. If you learn scales and arpeggios, you get the freedom of the fretboard. That's when you can learn how to shred. But you can't shred unless you learn the scales and arpeggios. So learning these classical forms, which you do all walking next to the horse, by the way, not on top of the horse, creates a freedom of the horse, which is unmatched. And my therapy horses also go hunting, for example, and it's amazing, because I always wanted to have hunters that didn't run away with me or pull. And suddenly, through all of that classical work, I have these horses that sit nicely on their haunches and bounce their way into fences and behave politely. It's like I never had that experience before. So it's weird. It crosses over into all these other areas of life. The other thing is people talk about boundaries. If you have a yes environment, if you're always following the kid, well, where are the boundaries? They're there. But you want to pick and choose them. You want to pick your battles. So a really good boundary, again, if you look at Richard, you may have to avert your eyes, of course, because he's so handsome. But if you look at Richard, you'll see that he has this thing called an epidermis. That's a very good boundary, because it's not a barrier. A barrier you can jump over, you can smash down, you can kick in a door, you can jump over a fence, you can break a window, whatever. And they almost invite you to do this. But a boundary is flexible. His epidermis, the more beer he drinks, the more it grows with him. When he goes on the wagon for a bit, it shrinks with him. If you cut his skin, it will regenerate. It will heal itself. If you take him out on a hot day, his skin will allow enough moisture through it to cool him. But if you take him out on a cold, wet day, those same pores will shut off to retain the heat inside. That's a good boundary. Infinitely flexible, but still there. You want to constantly expand comfort zones. If you're not expanding comfort zones, if you're not expanding brain cells, how do you expand BDNF and brain cells? These are cell membranes, just like the epidermis, that have to get bigger and bigger, don't they? And neurons that have to fire together. So there are boundaries, because you also need myelin. You need the fatty tissue around a connection between neurons to be like a sort of protective cable, plastic thing that you'd have on your cell phone cable. If you just had the wires, it would break. Exactly the same. It creates a bit of a boundary, but it's very flexible. That's the nature of the work that we do. It's effectively all neuroplasticity and neuroscience with classical horsemanship to create equine well-being and neuroplasticity in people. But it started with necessity, me standing in a field, wondering what to do with this son I couldn't reach, having tried other forms of therapy that didn't work. Now, where do we sit in the rest of the equine assisted world? Because there are many, many modalities out there. When people are going to do horseboy method, movement method, or techine, or hopefully a combination of them, I always encourage them to do more things than just what we do. Of course, you want to have a diverse portfolio. You don't know who's going to come through your door. And so do you want to also look at things like Igala? Do you also want to look at things like hippotherapy? Do you want to? Yes, yes, of course, of course, of course. You don't want to be limited. We are probably one of the few programs out there that actively encourage the people that learn our programs to go and also learn other people's programs, because that's common sense. Learn more than one language. Yes, absolutely. Where do we differ? We're not doing pony rides. We're not leading kids around and just delivering a ride, a pony ride. No. What we're delivering is neuroplasticity. And we have to, therefore, take that neuroscience quite seriously. And we have to take the preparation of the horse seriously. And then we want to go out in nature and do it. We want to not be, excuse me, constrained to arenas. Doesn't mean we don't use arenas. Of course we do. But if we're using arenas, we also don't want the arena to be a sterile environment with walls and sand. That's not the world that we're trying to engage these children in. So you're going to have to create within that arena through your imagination all sorts of other things. So what is an arena? Well, an arena can be a beach. An arena can be a forest. How's an arena a forest? Well, you can make it one. So we did that, for example, at Liskinnet in County Cork. Days that kids had to be in the arena. Just like you build up jumps, we'd have trees in pots and we'd bring them in and we'd create a forest. The kid can create their own forest. The family can create a forest. And then when you're done, you can put the forest away. You put it outside the arena again, just like you take the jumps down. And it goes back into a horse training place again. Similarly, when I say it's the beach, yeah, you can put down cushions, rugs, even have a fire going in one of those metal things, you know, warming your hands, and all kinds of beach games going on, and a sofa in there if you want. You can be as creative as you want with this environment. Paint the walls. Have nature, mythology. You know, in movement method, we had a classroom in one of the schools we were working with in Colorado. Low-income kids. You think, well, Colorado, it's in the mountains, they're full of nature. Yeah, these kids never got out in it. And they had a classroom with no windows. That doesn't do anything good to the human brain. So we painted the mountain that was behind that school on that wall. Pikes Peak, one of the big 14,000 footers. And we put all the fauna and flora on there, and it became a teaching mechanism. You can always do this kind of thing. We did that again at Liskinnet. We painted all the wildlife on the walls. Or you can make it movable art. So, for example, at Stuart's Care in Kilcloon in County Meath, we hang silk prints of the old masters' paintings in the wall on the walls of the arena, and we have all these fake plants to create a natural feel, and we can change them. We can get the kids to change them. You think flexibly, you see. You're trying to engage the mind. We're not it's also not adaptive riding. We're not teaching children how to ride. Now, if a kid wants to learn how to ride, obviously follow the child. We're going to do that. But you're going to find that's a minority of kids that really want to do that. What they're looking for is healing from distress, negative conditions associated with the condition that they've got, stress, cortisol, that kind of thing. That's our job, is to deliver freedom from that stress and neuroplasticity. And we're going to do it quite easily through these programs that have developed over the last 20 years. But does it mean that you shouldn't do other programs? No, absolutely. You should do those along with them. And I'm actually always very excited to see what other things other horseboy centers are doing. So if you go, we've got perhaps 100 locations around the world. If you go to each of them, they'll look quite different, because each of these places has got its own context, it's got its own culture, it's got its own, just like every school you go to will be kind of different if it's a good school. But what they're delivering will be the same. And that way too for you, because you are the practitioner, you can't burn out. Or if you do burn out, you've got to come back. Or if you're in my position, I can't burn out and not come back because I'm in it beyond the grave, because my son needs me. So it's got to serve my interests too. So fortunately, I love horses. Fortunately, I love classical dressage. Fortunately, I love nature. Fortunately, I love mythology. Fortunately, I love neuroscience. I love all these things. So it sustains me. It keeps me interested. But ask yourself, what are your passionate interests? What are your dreams? And make sure that your place reflects those. Are you really interested in art? Make it an art gallery. Get different artists to put their stuff on the walls of your arena, and make it change it up every 6 weeks. Are you into science? What are you into? Make sure that that is a large chunk of how you deliver your practice, and that way you will stay fresh. You will stay inspired. All right. So I think that's kind of as good an overview as I could possibly come up with. Does anyone have any questions based on what I've said?
You're an inspiration, Rupert, as ever. To do that without, well, I shouldn't say do it without notes. I know it comes from the heart, comes from your lifetime of experience, but it's you bring so much of the humanity into what this is really about. And
it's all about the humanity, honestly. You know this. You can be the best rider or equine practitioner in the world, but if you don't have the good bedside manner, if you're not coming from a point of love, forget it. It's not going to work. Yeah.
Well, I suppose if there's one thing that could be achieved by one equine trust being here, it's to try and acquire some funding or some support. So just to talk about nuts and bolts on the training. Yeah. So if there were currently coaches with a riding instruction practice or a horse training practice, whatever, which is the people we've reached out to and who were probably the first to watch this webinar, then we had spoken briefly what's actually involved if we said, can you come here in January or February? How do we set up a training?
All right. The easiest way to do it is to offer all three programs and see which ones people are the most interested in. Because if I come in for, say, 3 days, 4 days, I can deliver all three of those programs because they're all 2-day courses, but I can double up, you see. So I can do horseboy method in the mornings and movement method in the evenings, and then deliver on the last 2 days tackine or something like that. So I often do it that way when people bring me into a place and they want to maximize the effectiveness. It's often good to say, okay, who's really interested in the non-horse side? That's movement method. Who's really interested in the horseboy method? Who's really interested in the tackine horse training as its own therapy side? And what usually happens is people are actually a bit interested in all three, or they might be interested in 2 or something like that. So my suggestion is bring me in for between 2 and 4 days, and then I can deliver those. And I have trainers as well. I can also send trainers up from Ireland, and I can also bring trainers in from the UK, whether I bring them in physically or by Zoom, to answer certain questions about, for example, the financial aspect or the insurance aspect of things, or how do you get things paid for on that. So because everybody actually does it a little bit differently. So I could look at 3 different models, 4 different models in the UK. How are they doing it? 3 different models, 4 different models in the Republic of Ireland. How are they doing it? Because Northern Ireland is its own special organism. You have a little bit aspects of both, and there are also projects about cross-border uh, sort of peace and reconciliation type things,
Yeah,
which I think is very logical to tap into, because that's trauma, and we're obviously dealing with that, particularly with our Takim program. So, and Sammy at Castle Leslie is definitely looking at things, from through that lens.
mm,
Um, so my suggestion, yeah, would be that we do a sort of cluster of trainings, which each one for the basic level is 2 days. Horse boy level 1, um, movement method level 1 and 2 is its own 2-day thing, and Takim level 1 is that they're all 2 days, but they can be done. They can be layered, and if I bring in more than one trainer, they can even be somewhat simultaneous.
Well, talk just a little bit then about what we had spoken earlier in the year to you about what accreditation looks like and what ongoing supervision looks like, because there's quite a commitment
Okay.
here in
Yeah.
terms.
Well, of course, anything is a commitment, right? But yes,
Yeah.
if somebody wants to become a recognized practitioner of one of our methods, it's not enough to just take a 2-day course, obviously.
Yeah.
So there's an evaluation process that then people go through over a series of months, where they have to show us through video and case studies and written things that they've really taken in the training and that they've applied it. And they also have to show us their horses, their environment, and all of that. Now, we don't make it prohibitively difficult, but we're thorough enough that we will know whether or not we can certify you that way. If you do a course, which is the entry you have to do to understand what it is you're even engaging in, you get a certificate that just says you did this course. Not that we recognize you as a practitioner, because we have no idea until you show us that you can actually do this. So there is that commitment, and there's a certain amount of ongoing. You have to join the website, which is a professional organization, and engage in some of the continuous education that we constantly put up there. So we're always doing webinars, we're always bringing in neuroscientists, we're always offering more education. We need to see that you do a base minimum of showing up for those. Now, it doesn't mean you have, like here we record them, right, so people can also listen to them after we've done them, but we need to see that they are doing them. And then from time to time we do some oversight. We will send someone to see that you're doing it correctly occasionally, on the equine side and on the human side, but we're not going to come in like bureaucrats with clipboards. We operate very much as a kind of large family. It's much more collegial than that. And what I mean by that is, let's say you run into a problem. We're actually here to help you. We help people fundraise. We help people troubleshoot, how to get stuff paid for by insurance, how to get stuff paid for by local education authorities, or that our mentors and practitioners. If you a registered practitioner, that would be for Horseboy or Takin. We call our registered practitioners and movement method mentors. So the people who've been at it for a long time and have made a go of it are always there to help mentor the other people. So if you've got a problem, well, how do I get CAMS, to fund what I'm doing? We've got people who will talk you through and walk you through that process. How do I, if you're in the USA, how do I get insurance companies to pay for it? We got people that will help you. If you are in the Netherlands and they have their set, we got people that will help you. So, and it's actually often very good. Interestingly, people say, well, how's it of use for me to talk to someone who's in the USA or someone who's in the Netherlands? Well, actually, what you often find is that each country has its own set of rules with advantages and disadvantages to the other countries. And frequently, if you go to your local authority and say, they're doing this in the Netherlands, why can't we do this here? Or, you go to an insurance company and say, they're doing it, why can't we do it? Interestingly, things often shift. We found that to the degree that when we were first getting our own insurance, first in the USA and then internationally, that was right about the time that what's now Path International used to be called NARA, which is effectively like RDA in the USA, abandoned riding with a kid in the saddle with you, because they found they couldn't do it. And so their insurance policy, which was the dominant one, suddenly wasn't covering that. So people said, well, if we do what you do, we can't get it covered. So we're like, all right. So we just found an insurance company that allowed us to write our own insurance policy.
Yeah, that's a big
And
deal.
so, there's always a way. And when you're one of the things, there's can do people and can't do people. If you are a can't do person, well, sure, okay, fine. But if you're basically a can do person, but you don't know how, then you go through the same process that I talked about before, which is you reach out for mentorship. And when I began this whole thing, I had to go and find the mentors. But one of the nice things about the Horseboy community, the New Trails community, is the mentors are now there and they really will help you. And they're often getting insights cross-border can be as useful as finding out something like, how do I get CAMS in the UK to pay for my thing here in Northern Ireland, which you need both, is basically the point I'm trying to make. Yeah.
Yeah. And just examples, maybe if you can, of people who've come entirely from a riding coaching background, which is what I suppose we're this little micro focus we have today. How they've actually added this in as a genuine revenue earner.
Oh yeah, gosh.
How it actually works.
Okay. So if you want to make $1 million, I advise you strongly to go and get a law degree.
Yeah.
And enter the legal profession. However, I do know many people who have made a real go of it financially. Yes, I do know people who've made $1 million doing this. Absolutely.
No, well, I'm not even.
No, but hear me out.
Right.
What I'm trying to say is, there was a time when this type of equine assisted work that we were doing was not just underpaid, but you basically had to pay to do it. And that wasn't so long ago. That was up to about COVID, basically. Things have shifted massively. So there is all sorts of government money available. Okay, and local authority money available. But within the coaching world, yeah, it's a rapidly expanding market. And there's an acceptance of it now in the mainstream that there was not, I think, pre-COVID. I think the whole conversation around mental health has gone through a sort of massive paradigm shift since then. So to establish yourself as an equine coach now is quite a viable thing to do. And yes, you probably want to go and get your coaching license. But if you add something like, say, Takin to that, our non-mounted program where you're learning all the classical stuff, suddenly not only do you have this extra string to your bow, because frankly, many equine coaches lose their clientele over time because it is slightly limited, particularly if you're a client who's not like massively motivated by horses. There's only so many times you're going to show up to watch horses do certain behaviors and try to interpret them through a psychological lens. That sort of equine assisted psychotherapy type approach, it is very good, but it has its limitations too over time. If you train these same people to become really good master horse trainers, this is really absorbing. People want to do this. They will want to show up over years to learn how to do this. Also, what happens is if you acquire these skills, I did not always have these skills. I didn't come out of my mother's womb knowing how to get horses to piaffe passage and do flying changes in hand and that sort of thing. I learned these skills. You have a very different place in the equine market if you have these skills. You become the go-to person for that sort of stuff. And that is its own income stream. You can then diversify your income stream. So you can have, a non-profit, a CIC,
Yeah.
and a for-profit, all of which are delivering different programs, but within effectively the same neuropsychiatric and equine well-being thing, but you could be wearing different hats. So someone could bring me in as a dressage trainer, but I'm going to talk to them about equine well-being and human well-being, and probably pretty soon that person with that dressage yard or that eventing yard is running a horseboy program. Similarly, the person who's an equine coach, and I do a lot of work with equine coaches in the Netherlands. Actually, it's interesting that brought that up, because it's a big industry there, and one of the reasons they bring me in for taquine particularly is for this slight limitation of the equine assisted psychotherapy, which I talked about, which is there can be difficulty with retention of clients over time, just because it can become a bit repetitive. It's often very, very, very good in the initial 12 months or so, and then after that it might peter off. So they need ways to keep their clients engaged, and then they get more and more interested in their own equine well-being anyway. And then suddenly through the Takin program, they have 5, 6 other income streams that are coming in, because there's a skill set that is more diverse, perhaps. So you can have your economic model with 5 to 7 parallel streams, some of which are not for profit, where you actually raise money and get donation money and grants, some of which are for profit, where you're delivering trainings. Some of them are in between, that's the CIC, where you're delivering services for which you get paid by local authorities and that sort of thing, and private individuals. And then within each of those 3 things, there's subcategories. And we've gone through that learning curve ourselves, and many of our longer term places have too. And they're always available to talk anybody through the nuts and bolts of the economics. Yeah. But the trick is you want to be fluid. You need a diverse skill set, and that's what we endeavor to give people.
And just briefly, where do you, if we can go forward with some training, we don't want to be exclusive or excluding anybody, but in terms of setting a base level of horsemanship for the mounted work, where do you tend to pitch? I know you've
Well, if you're going to climb up there with somebody else's child, it's a good idea to have a couple of decades under your belt of horses bouncing around underneath you. Yeah. If you've got an independent seat. But we would normally say, if someone's been riding for a good 10 years or so, that we could look at it. And that's why we have the non-mounted programs as well. So let's say someone is a newcomer to horses. Be honest with yourself. If a horse does something funky while you're up there with a child like this, and the horse is going that way because the old lady opened her umbrella in front of your horse, which you have bomb-proof, but for some reason on this day of all days, they're reacting to red umbrellas, even though they've never reacted to red umbrellas before. You need to be sure that you can hold the center of that, and that you can also produce the horse that you can bring back to equilibrium very quickly. So yeah, horseboy method, if you're going to be a practitioner of that, you want to be a relatively secure rider with a secure seat. If you're going to work with taquine, no, you could be a complete newbie. But you would need to work under the mentorship of somebody who understood horse behavior quite well. But most people that are getting into the equine assisted market are usually coming in with some years of horsemanship under their belt, Now, to get to the other upper levels of what we do, so let's say, for example, you want to do horseboy level 2 and up. Well, we would need to see you in horseboy 1 first, and then we can assess whether or not it's safe to take you through those other levels. That's just, reasonable. But what we do is if we see that somebody needs work, we'll say, here's what you need to do. Go and do those things, and then come back to us in 24 months or whatever, and then show us, and then we can absolutely take you through the higher levels. But I think the majority of people that get involved in this work are coming from relatively horsey backgrounds, including the young people that might be coming out of, say, Caffrey or somewhere like that, and they're going in and coming out with their BHSAI or whatever it is they call it now, the level 3. Their chances are their first introduction to horses wasn't their first year at Caffrey. But it doesn't mean that some of them who did, the minority that did come in that way, can't be trained. They absolutely can. It's just that, one needs to put them through some diverse education. We all know that really good horse skills take a while to acquire. I mean, that's just a given within what we do. I think everyone understands that is reasonable. But we don't require that you're at a certain standard of, say, dressage or anything. No, absolutely not. No, we can teach you all of that stuff easily. Really, the only real requirement is, are you teachable? Do you have a curious and inquiring mind? Are you truly open to learning new stuff? And are you willing to go that extra mile to try to really not achieve mastery? I think what's the word I'm looking for, to try to reach a standard of excellence professionally, which would apply to anything that you did, whether it was horses or anything else. If you have that type of mind, you are definitely qualified for this work. And remember too that we have movement method, which has no horses at all. And even if you are super horsey and really skilled, we kind of want you to do movement method as well, because we want you to be able to see through a non-horsey lens. One of the difficulties with horse people, and I'm guilty as charged, is that we are way too horse focused. So if the person in front of us isn't motivated by that, we often are a bit lost. So you have to have more than one game up your sleeve. And so movement method is really important, and it can be flummoxing, because you can have a kid who loved to ride on Tuesday but for some reason does not want to ride on Thursday. What are you going to do? Or kids that go in and out of the relationship with the horse. My own son has done that. You need more than one string to your bow, which means really understanding that neuroscience and really understanding what follow the child means. And by child, by the way, you can substitute the word child with service user, right? Client, because it can be an adult just the same. And not necessarily autistic by any means, ADHD, trauma, anything.
Christine, Una, any? I'm trying to anticipate what questions those that aren't on the call actually today will think about. I know a lot will be practical stuff, but you both expressed an interest in the past.
Yes, I found that absolutely fascinating, Rupert. I have listened to you before, and watched demonstrations.
Some of us can't go anywhere, Christine, without a bloody podcast in the car. It seems to be.
I do just to vex Richard, but I put all these podcasts out.
Yeah, no, I've sort of familiarized myself a very little bit with what you do. I've done a coach and RD, very heavily involved in RDA, and also BHS coach, and I've done equine, I suppose EAS practitioner training with Athena Hurd. But what you've spoken about today rings very, very true for me in a lot of ways. And interestingly, I'm thinking about people that I know who are not neurodiverse, where especially the movement method, and so I can actually identify how certain things would help them just cope with their normal everyday little challenges. But no, absolutely fascinating. I'll definitely get onto the website and would very much be interested in training.
this makes me think one of the things you brought up there is, so with movement method, and Richard, you were asking about economic models and so on. If you have some sort of basically a farm school done with movement method, horses are just a part of it. This opens up your practice massively. So just off the top of my head, there's 2 places in the UK, 3 actually, I could name them right now. So Move the Mind in Somerset, Making Momentum in Cheshire, and New Leaf Triangle in Leicestershire, all operate at the kind of apex of the horse stuff that we do, but they also are places where school refusers can go and actually get through their O levels done on the farm. So it allows a kind of flexibility to your practice. If you are personally the kind of person that really is interested in teaching horses how to do airs above the ground, well, great, because you can do that as part of what we do. But it doesn't have to be limited to that at all. And that means that you can also have team members, as part of your practice, who deliver the aspects that you might be less interested in. But you make sure that you can serve the whole picture. For example, Move the Mind in Somerset, it's a really good model. What Nicole Gillard there does is she rents out part of the ground to different movement method practitioners, and also a forest school and a couple of other things, and there's a good OT on site, and they all operate out of tiny houses which are dotted around the field. So she can offer her horseboy and her takin because that's where her heart lies. But she knows that the kids need more than that. She can't deliver and doesn't want to deliver every single thing, but she has a campus, if you like.
Yeah.
Where with different faculties, where the same client could be served in 5 different ways. And so, schools send their people there.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working with BHS on an educational program, and we're starting a program with adult carers soon as well, in association with the Northern Trust, and also working with Women's Aid. So it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Absolutely.
But I just see so much diversity there in terms of what we could do. We do have a small herd and a small site, but I just wish I was 30 years younger. I'd have a little bit more time to get on top of all this stuff, and because it's incredible. I really do 100% believe that it works, and it's what we need, desperately need.
What we stress is tribe. We're all pushed for time, right? If you get together with a sort of small critical mass of other people who are seeing it through the same lens that you are, and you go through the same basic training, then you can, between you, decide, all right, well, I kind of want to cover that side. You want to kind of cover that side. And even if you're not on the same physical site, you can shunt the clients around between you. We have a group of people in Cornwall in the southwest of the UK who do it that way, for example. And they're all within about 20 miles of each other, and different clients go to different ones. And I actually do the same thing in Germany with the clients that I have around the Frankfurt area, because we just happen to have this really interesting line of different therapists up and down this one motorway that goes through central Germany. They all do slightly separate things, and some of them don't do it with the horse at all. So I can say to the family, divide your time between, like, just drive up and down here, and they will all serve you, and they end up getting together and cooperating with each other. One of the difficult things, I think, for a lot of equine practitioners is isolation. And that's where it can seem overwhelming, thinking, oh gosh, I've got to learn all this new stuff, and I've got to no, you don't. You just got to be part of a group of people that want to. And then that's the nice thing about Northern Ireland, is it's geographically small. So most people are within an hour to an hour and a half of each other, but a lot of people are actually quite a lot closer. A lot of people are 40 to 45 minutes from each other. And this makes life, much more doable. It gets tougher in the USA, for example, where the distances can be really quite challenging. And if you are like the one person in that county doing it, okay, but most parts of the UK and Ireland, that's not the picture. But that's one of the things we try to promote the most among our people, is working together.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much, Rupert. It's been mind-blowing, actually, but really, really good. Thank you so much.
There's a very serious message in there, I suppose, which has taken me quite some time to grasp. Rupert was kind enough to invite us from One Equine down to a tribe day or tribe weekend down in County Meath in August. And there were people there from the States and from Australia and all over. And these are all practitioners who are part of this tribe. I'm not sure what the qualifications are to get into it, but I was never in an environment, I'm lucky to have been in other scenarios in the past, but I was never in an environment where there were no egos. There were no egos in the room. I couldn't figure what it was in the first couple of hours. It made me, I knew maybe 3 or 4 people in the room. Everybody else was new. And it's not to put pokes at the pedestal, it's just the nature of the work. There's the authenticity of communication. So it's a serious point. If I was going into something else and say I'd been a riding instructor, I can only imagine what that life must be. But I think it's a life of scarcity to some extent. There's competition for clients, and there's a collaboration, but there's quite a lot of opinions, and my way is better than your way. There's a competitive thing, competitive vibe. There is no competitive vibe in this that I could discern anywhere. If it does come up, it's because somebody's actually, as Rupert said earlier, a little bit protective of what they're doing and not confident. To really understand that if you set up on your own to do something, you're not on your own. And these are not people that are doing this just because they wanted. The more that I saw the practitioners achieved, the more they wanted to share what they'd achieved, how they'd achieved it. That's a very, very different scenario from any other human endeavor I've ever seen in life.
Well, you're kind. I mean, the reason is, well, A, we're all on a mission, which is to help as many people as we can. But B, there is no scarcity. That's almost an unfortunate thing in our line of work. What I mean by that is, you could have a horse boy or a movement method place or an equine assisted place of any kind every 5 kilometers in Northern Ireland, and you still would not be able to serve the entirety of the people who need the service. And what you don't want really is a lot of really big centers serving hundreds of clients per week. It's not that you don't want any of that. We definitely do have that model, and those people do an amazing job. Liskinet, Stuart's Care, Child Vision, 100%. But they would be the first people to say what the vast majority of these families need is lots and lots of small practitioners, dotted around in their neighborhood. And because things are no longer as underfunded as they used to be, it's now quite viable for people to run a small program that is not overwhelming. So we want to share because frankly, none of us can handle the amount of demand that there is. We absolutely need more people doing this. And we will be the first to shunt our business to you,
I only know you from phone calls, but I would anticipate you're probably never were silent for 2 hours in your life before as this. Would that be true?
That would be right. You hit the nail on the head. Yep.
Have you any questions or any thoughts? I know your own journey's been a particularly personal one.
Yeah, diagnosed autistic with my youngest was. She was diagnosed in November 23. I was diagnosed January 24. Makes a heck of a lot of sense. And being able to understand through yourselves the importance. And I always knew that horses were magical for myself. I always knew that I found my peace and my home with them after a few particularly difficult years. And I knew that for myself, but to actually open that up then to my community would be a dream. It would be absolutely, even on a basis of working with the livery aspect to begin with, to even have horses on the ground, especially with closures of various equestrian facilities over the last 10, 15 years. But to allow my community to be involved and to be around that, but then to go on and help those neurodivergent like myself and like my daughter, would be a dream come true. And unfortunately, I've been thinking about this and preaching about this for the last nearly 6 years, and the only issue I have is money. The only issue that I have is getting someone to come on board and see exactly what we're talking about, see exactly what we can do for the kids, especially in the community, and especially with what's going on at the minute. With it's almost like a pandemic of male suicides at the minute. We've lost quite a few friends in the last especially. So I think to get this information out is what I'll do to the day it is. I want this out there, and I want people to be aware of it. Again, if please God I can get it to this area, I'll do it. I'll fight tooth and nail till I get it available for more people. Because we still have all these generations, especially COVID babies, and all they're coming up through the ranks. We don't know what aspect of trauma or damage or side effects that would have had to these three folk coming up behind us. So that's where I am anyway.
Yeah.
Well,
the good news with this, when we're talking about neuroplasticity, what we're really talking about is resilience. When you have a negative experience, whatever it is, you tend not to stay there. You tend to recover from it to whatever degree and move on. However, there are more or less effective ways of doing that. Okay, we know that this is part of the work that we do. But the other thing which is worth considering is there's such thing as negative neuroplasticity too. So, for example, repeated negative behaviors or being in the wrong environment physically or emotionally over a long period of time can create negative neuroplasticity. What do I mean by that? Negative neuroplasticity is the building up of cortisol scarring in the brain, which effectively limits your abilities to think, be resilient, resolve conflict, that sort of thing. It has nothing to do with your intellect. Your intellect can be you can have a high IQ level, but have negative neuroplasticity. However, because the brain is so plastic, and because oxytocin acts immediately upon cortisol scarring in the brain, you can actually begin to reverse that process very, very fast. So one of the things that, particularly through movement method, one can really show people is not only do you not have to be stuck where you are, you can move on within moments. Now, initially, they will be just moments, but each of those moments, if you string them together, becomes like a necklace. And then it becomes like this aesthetic whole, this piece of jewelry. One moment, one moment, one moment, one moment, one moment. One brush of the paintbrush, one stroke of the paintbrush, and then suddenly, oh my gosh, look, I got a painting. But they are actually composed. A musical composition is composed of separate notes. So when one understands the process of neuroplasticity, one can then understand how to make it a positive process. That's the use of nature. That's the follow the child or follow the human. That's understanding positive and negative sensory input. That's understanding how emotion and the endocrine system work. And we, give all that training. But at the end of the day, if you can move around in nature with someone nice who doesn't threaten you, with no bad sensory issues, you're probably okay. And if you have that as your bottom line, that's why horses are so amazing. Then there's other things with horses that we will also go into in the trainings, which is like the heart math approach, electromagnetic resonances of hearts. Animals with very big hearts who are prey animals, not predators, make us feel very, very good because they have enormous hearts, and that more and more is being understood and measured about this. And the Heart Math Institute in California, for example, is a front runner in this kind of work. But when one begins to understand these tools that one can use, then it's not so much of a mystery anymore. And then one can also know why, oh, well, that's why going for a walk on the beach or a walk in the forest actually made me feel good. Okay, but how do I double down on that? How do I 10x that? How do I turn that into a culture which allows me to then actually have a different brain that becomes a different person, that gets remarkably different outcomes? What do I do if I fall back into those negative outcomes? I've got the tools to climb back out of the hole. I don't have to freak out each time I'm down in that hole, because you're going to be down in that hole sometimes. I don't have to stay there as long. And then, oh, I can reach out and give someone else a hand up, out. Or I know how to reach up for a hand when I need it. Yeah.
Rupert, you're an inspiration.
Well, thank you.
My
son is the inspiration, really. Without him, I wouldn't have known any of this. But yeah.
Well, I only met him once there in August and killed me. That just was, yeah. Look, folks, I don't bring any background to this. Before we have Molly and Julie on our board, and the One Equine board, who've got serious horse credentials. But the reason that the organisation exists isn't to champion. It's to say, maybe if there's a flagpole here in Northern Ireland and we can get some money and we can get some focus and we can devote some time and resource to pushing the awareness piece, then there's a tipping point somewhere where this will become more widely understood. So it's all about just conversation after conversation.
Exactly. It's how we've always done it. You just get a few interested practitioners doing it.
Yeah.
And the momentum begins. It takes care of itself.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much. I suppose I have some responsibility to conclude this within 2 hours. So otherwise it's on false pretenses that we get people on board of these things. But Rupert, thank you so much for your time.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
For sure.
And I hope to see you guys again soon.
Thank you
very much indeed.
Okay.
Aisling, have you any questions? Sorry, before you go, I should say Aisling's One Equine project manager, One Equine entire staff. Our cameras failed today, so have I missed anything, Aisling?
No, I think you were spot on there, and I'll circulate the recording and all the links to the websites again anyway. So no need to go hunt them out. I'll send them on to you as well. But thank you all so much for joining.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rupert. Enjoy your dessert.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.